here onwards, I'll request ADG sir to moderate the session. Thank you.
Shall we? Good afternoon to you all, friends. On behalf of PIB Chennai, I welcome you all. Particularly on a Sunday afternoon, I am thankful to you for being with us. And I also welcome the dignitaries on the dais, Mr. Kamal Kishore, Member Secretary of NDMA, and Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, the member NDMA. As the country is staring through vital issues of international importance, it is our duty to take this message across to the people. So I seek your cooperation in this task and also in ensuring good coverage in the events lined up for this week. With this, I hand over to Mr. Kamal Kishore.
Thank you very much, Mr. ADG, and I and my colleague General Hasnan, we are delighted to be here this afternoon. And as ADG said, we are particularly appreciative that on a Sunday afternoon you are here with us to cover this event. So thank you very much. We will be happy to provide any additional information you might want after this press meet as well. So, in essence, we are meeting here for the third time as part of a newly constituted working group under the under Indian presidency on G20. It is a working group that focuses on disaster risk reduction issues. Prior to the Indian presidency, the discussions on disaster risk reduction within the G20 framework have happened, but they have happened in a scattered way from time to time in bits and pieces. So it is Indian presidency's endeavor to really raise the profile of disaster risk reduction issues, as you have been seeing for the last several months. The number, frequency, the impact, severity of disasters is increasing. So this is really something that the international community should, and particularly G20 countries that represent large economies of the world, should cooperate. I'll just say three things by way of the scope of the work that we will be doing over the next 2.5 days. Number one, this is as I said, this is the third meeting. The first meeting happened at the end of March in Gandhinagar. The second meeting happened in Mumbai at the end of May. So we are meeting for the third time. And when we started the discussion in Gandhinagar, we had identified 5 priorities for this working group. One was to ensure early warning for all across the world. The second was investing in disaster and climate resilient infrastructure, focusing on resilience. The third was improving the financing framework for disaster risk reduction across the world at the national as well as international levels, but with focus on national level. The fourth priority was to improve systems for better post-disaster recovery, building back better after disasters at the national and global levels. And finally, ecosystem-based approaches to disaster risk reduction. On all of these 5 priorities within the working group, there have been deliberations in the first meeting, in the second meeting. Many of our knowledge partners have contributed ideas, contributed analysis for that. So this meeting, the third meeting, the Chennai meeting, is very significant because we will come up with a G20 communique or a G20 joint statement, if you like, on disaster risk reduction, which will then be fed to the Sherpa level and to the leaders of G20. So it is very significant that we are coming to this sort of a global communique of G20 on disaster risk reduction, which will be the first ever G20 communique on disaster risk reduction in the city of Chennai. So, the city itself has done many things for disaster risk reduction. So it's very symbolic that we are doing it here. The second part of my comments is that alongside these events, we will also have a few side events. Later this afternoon, we have a curtain raiser where we will look at the role of disruptive technologies in disaster risk reduction. Tomorrow, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction will convene a session on making infrastructure resilience. There will be another side event tomorrow focusing on the whole issue of disaster risk governance. How do we improve the capacities at different levels for that? And on the third day, 26th, we will we'll have a site visit to Mahabalipuram, and there will be two side events there. One on role and leadership of women in disaster risk reduction, and another one on capacity development. So there will be 5 side events. So there is a lot. That's the presidency, and we are hoping and we are confident that Brazil will take this work forward as well. Very senior level officials from Brazil are going to participate in the meetings starting tomorrow. So I think that is a quick overview of what we are going to do, what has happened in the past, and what is the road ahead. All of this work connects with all the work that we do at NDMA. For example, General Hasnan leads a lot of work on preparedness, improved post-disaster response. So that's a key element of what features in the discussions as well. So it's not something which is outside of our main work. It's just that what we do as a regular work of NDMA, Government of India, our state governments, we are taking that discussion to the international stage as well. Thank you very much. And unless General Hasnan wants to say something at this point.
I think Kamal Sahab has covered everything in very, very comprehensively, but for the sake of the friends from the media, it may be a good idea to just remember, maybe even Google and go into more knowledge about what is the Sendai framework. The Sendai framework is the 15-year program that the United Nations has laid out to be completed by 2030 for sustainable growth, right? That the objectives of all our work is ultimately to meet the objectives of the Sendai framework.
Now we are open to the questions. Anybody wishing to raise questions, please. Yeah. Mike. Inge.
Ratsaman from Business Line here. You talked about the group communique. The finance, apparently when the Sherpas meet, they did not find a consensus on this, but you seems to be very confident that you will come out. What sort of confidence is it in previous meetings? Did you get a kind of idea as to that could be one consensus? The second part is, can you just discuss as to what you talked about the Gandhinagar event? Maybe you can elaborate as to what was discussed in the Mumbai event also. Thank you.
So, thank you for those questions. The first is how confident we are about the consensus. I think compared to many other issues, there is much greater agreement on different aspects of disaster risk reduction. And this is not something that the discussion is not starting tomorrow. We've been discussing this for the last 4 months. So the broad contours of what the communique will look like will be there. So we expect that there will be a good momentum in terms of what G20 can do together going forward from here. Your second question, what happened in Gandhinagar and Mumbai? So Gandhinagar was the first meeting where we introduced the 5 priorities from the presidency's side, which were wholeheartedly and quite enthusiastically embraced by the G20 countries. In the margins of the Gandhinagar meeting, a number of side events were held. There was one side event on early warning systems where actually we curated experience from the states like Tamil Nadu and Odisha as well, where we have successfully used early warning systems for saving lives. There was a side event curated by the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. There was a side event on Build Back Better. So there was a lot of substantive conversation that informed. And Mumbai, as you would expect, the focus was on how can countries do a better job of financing disaster risk reduction at home. So the main theme, cutting across all phases of disaster risk management, disaster prevention, disaster preparedness, disaster response, disaster recovery, financing, how do you finance that? And when I talk about finance, it's not just about more money. It's about the right kind of money at the right time so that the outcome for people who are affected by disasters or people who are likely to be affected by disasters is really optimal. So the discussions that happened in Gandhinagar and Mumbai have prepared the ground for the meeting that we are going to have tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and on 26th. Thank you.
Is there any other countries apart from our G20 representatives who are going to join through online or willing, or they're going to give some suggestions, or it can be also taken up?
In the formal meetings, there is no such provision. It's G20 countries, and there are a set of 8 invited countries. They are going to be present in person.
See, now the coastal erosion has become a huge problem, and there is demands from the state governments like Kerala and even Tamil Nadu to declare this coastal erosion as a natural disaster. And even in the South Zone, recently held South Zone Council also this matter has come up. So what exactly is the status of it? Because it's been quite some time and there's a lot of issues surrounding the coastal erosion problem.
Thank you for that question. I think we should discuss that separately. This is a G20 presser. In the context of G20, what I can say is that all disasters, whether it's coastal erosion, whether it's heat wave, whether it's floods, drought, earthquakes, everything is under discussion. It's not specific to any hazard. And many of the G20 countries are also faced by coastal and river erosion. So in future, we can have the opportunity to exchange with them to see what are their good practices, how are they dealing with the problem of coastal erosion and sometimes coastal accretion as well. Thank you.
No, I'm asking in the context of G20 meeting only, like what are the other countries doing and what we can take the learnings and what we can tell the other countries.
So we don't have specific thing right now on coastal erosion. It's across all hazards, but in future we can work on this. If this is a priority for us, we can say, let's look at how other countries that are faced with this problem are dealing with it. So this is something where technical exchange discussion can definitely happen. Thank you.
Hello. Sir, I'm Nagarajan from Dinamalar. G20 meetings are focusing in CBR and related issues, sir. Yes.
So, as I said in response to the previous question, it's really the discussion on disaster risk reduction is multi-hazard. There is no hazard which is left out. It's not a specific focus on CBRN or on earthquakes or coastal hazards. But you have to recognize also that this is a new working group. We've just started. Other working groups have had a history of 7, 8 years of working together. But if we wanted to do an exchange on CBRN, how other countries are building their resilience to CBRN disasters, this is something definitely that can be done as a follow-up. Thank you.
So Siddharth here from Beyond. I just want to ask you, particularly when it comes to foreseeing and predicting disasters, ground-based, space-based, ocean-based sensors are necessary. But there's a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. Like very few nations have it, very few, a lot of them don't have it. So what is being done to bridge this gap? What are, international cooperation initiatives in this regard?
Thank you very much. That is an excellent question. The first point I want to say is that when it comes to observation, whether they are observations, ground-based observations, or space-based observation, or observational networks in the oceans, these are global public goods. So if you are measuring ocean temperature somewhere far away in the Indian Ocean, the data that comes from it actually feeds the models globally. So there was a discussion in the first meeting that happened in Gandhinagar on specifically how do we continue to finance the global observational network? How do we improve its density globally? So that is really not so much a question of have or have-nots. You need observational network, whether it's a poor country or a rich country or a middle-income country. Now comes the issue of the access to warning, a timely dissemination of warning, and capability at the local level to act on that warning. That has been a major area of focus at NDMA. I'm sure some of you must have seen it in your phones, an effort that General Hasnain leads. We have to improve dissemination. We have implemented common alerting protocol so that you have location-specific message on hazards in your phones. A second phase will further improve this. So this is something we want to share with the other countries, learn from their experiences, where we can contribute, we contribute, where we can learn from them, we learn from them. In addition to that, it is good to have warning disseminated at the local level, but there should be local capacity to actually act on that warning. So now we have resources for preparedness. NDMA itself does a large number of mock drills to actually respond to the warning. So I think that is as important as dissemination of warning itself. So on all of this, there is a lot of work, and in the margins of the Chennai meeting, there will be a small photo exhibition on Biparjoy cyclone, which occurred last month off the coast of Gujarat on our western coast, and where we were able to achieve the target of zero mortality. So, how did we do that? By doing an end-to-end early warning system. So, and that includes everyone, haves and have-nots. Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just add, for the interest of people of Chennai, Tamil Nadu in particular, the model that we are following in India is a model which was actually tested in Tamil Nadu. It's called the Common Alerting Protocol, and it was tested during the COVID time. It was also used for COVID dissemination of COVID information at that particular time. It's a very successful model, and you'll be happy to know that during Biparjoy, we had 32 million messages which went out on the Common Alerting Protocol, and that's one of the reasons why we could, warn people in time and reduce mortalities to such an extent.
Good evening, sir. I'm Aisha from DD News. So you talked about G20. This meeting will focus, also discuss about improving the system for post-disaster recovery and rehabilitation. This involves a huge, robust infrastructure to be in place. So now when you say that the communique will be ready in this third meeting, what kind of focus will be there on, from across the G20 countries to give a impetus to the financial requirement and build a financial infrastructure?
See, this is a process, and we are at the first step of the process, which will be this communique. There are three things that on this issue of post-disaster recovery and build back better that will be addressed. Number one is the issue of exchange of good practices. What kind of technologies to use, whether the recovery program should be driven by contractors or should be owner-driven. There's a lot of experience globally, including in India, things that have worked very well and things that have not worked. So we should learn from things that have not worked, and we should institutionalize things that we know are time-tested and work. So I think that's one full area of work. The second is looking at how we finance recovery. Now, as you know, under the 15th Finance Commission, there is a separate window in relief, the response fund, State Disaster Response Fund and National Disaster Response Fund, which caters to recovery and reconstruction. This is not something we've had in the past. We've had money for response, but not for recovery. So now that you have money there is a predictable mechanism. But we need to bring together resources from other avenues as well, such as the private sector. So that is the second thing. The third is, how do we look at recovery in an integrated way, as opposed to sector by sector? And how do we focus on recovery outcomes as opposed to recovery inputs? Let me illustrate that with an example. So we don't want to focus only on how many schools were rebuilt after a disaster. We want to focus on how many children went to school. So I think it's the outcome which is as important or even more important than the inputs we provide for recovery.
And with regard to the Sendai framework you said, sir, is that a guiding, template in this G20 also, where you take forward the priorities in this framework? Could you tell us a little more about that?
So yes, absolutely. The 5 priorities that I outlined are a subset of what is there in the Sendai framework. In May, on 17th, 18th, 19th May, there was a midterm review of progress against Sendai framework, and we even organized a G20 event there. So there is a lot of, and the progress on Sendai framework 8 years after it was adopted it leaves a lot to be desired. So it is expected that this effort by G20 will provide a push to Sendai framework. That is really the overarching framework.
I have just a couple of follow-up questions. You talked about the priorities, the 5 priorities which was first discussed. Out of the 5, which seems to be the most important in the 2 discussions which happened? And the number 2 is in terms of the financing part itself, the disaster recovery related financing. Can we expect some kind of funds? Is that something where all the countries will have pool in money and kind of help each other? Is there something which you are working on?
Thank you for that question. Out of the 5, the top 2 are the priority, early warning for all. It is entirely achievable globally in a few years. And of course, disaster and climate resilient infrastructure, we lead a global initiative called Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure in it. As a country, we are a big investor. We have a $1.4 trillion pipeline for infrastructure. So it's really important for us that we get it right in terms of resilience. So these are the 2 top priorities, but the other 3 also I cannot say that they are not priorities. So, between 5, I would say these 2 we want to advance very quickly, but the other 3 are priority as well. Your point on whether there will be fund, G20 does not work like that. It does not create new institutions, new funds. There are existing mechanisms that need to be more effective where G20 needs to come together. So we don't expect that a fund will be established which will be called a G20 fund or some such thing. There are existing mechanisms that need to converge, coordinate, and become much more effective.
Question to Lieutenant General. Sir, you mentioned about the 32 million messages that were disseminated during Biparjoy. So usually in a situation like this, in the run-up to a disaster, even electricity is cut down, supply is cut off. Then in addition to that, mobile networks are also disrupted. So how do you manage in such crisis situations to reach, to get the messages to the relevant population?
Good question, no doubt. Well, let me tell you, the amount of funds which have been expended on the coastline as a part of the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Program, a $1 billion program has been run under the aegis of the World Bank. And many of these areas, you'll find that the cabling has all gone underground. And because of that, you will find the power failures have been reduced to the minimum. This problem of mobiles and communication of messages is faced in different dimensions. You may sometimes have internet shutdowns due to law and order problems, and the messages don't go out from that. But they have to be overcome. Similarly, you have some problems sometimes where there's a complete shutdown of power. Then you have to provide artificially, perhaps, charging facilities through charging sets. The army does it all the time in Jammu and Kashmir, where you find many times the snow avalanches, you've had power shutdowns in the winter. And then the capabilities have been created to actually charge mobile phones. So, there are always methodologies which are there, which can be found. But in this particular case, the resilience was there because of the infrastructure which had already been built.
Okay, thank you, friends. Thank you for making it a success. Please join us for the high tea. Thank you.